Good morning, Phoenix, and welcome to the House of Mystery radio show. This is the place to come for true crime, conspiracy, and alternative history. Only on KFNX 1100 Independent Talk Radio. We're here every Saturday morning, 6 to 7 a.m., and I'm your host, Al Warren. You are back in the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren on KFNX Phoenix, and today we're talking about the afterlife, actually hacking the afterlife. And returning as a guest, we have Richard Martini. Thanks for being on the show, Richard.
Thank you, Al. I appreciate you having me be on. I mean, I love Phoenix. Phoenix is a bird that rises from the ashes, so it's the actual perfect metaphor for rebirth, re-life, reincarnation.
You know, it's true, but in Phoenix, I don't feel that way.
Well, I feel hot. I feel like a bird that's been burned up. Let's just put it that way. Whenever I'm in Phoenix.
Yeah, it's always very warm. But
it's a dry heat. As
yeah,
they say.
Yeah, it's dry heat. Actually, I cannot stand all the humidity in the east myself. So the dry's okay. But, you tend to be inside too much, but when it gets as hot as it does, like 120 and things like that.
Right, exactly. Well, I grew up in Chicago, and so there was a whole thing of being inside at all times during the winter, and you'd have a heated garage if you were lucky.
Yeah.
Or you'd go out, and start the car in the cold, and then go back in the house for half an hour till it warmed up, and then try to go to malls and stuff like that. So, totally understand the idea of avoiding, stuff that's stressful on the human body. But that is what we're doing on the planet.
Yeah,
right.
It seems that way. It seems like life is always throwing things at you, and I was really interested in this last work here that you were doing, the hacking the afterlife, and it just the wording is great, but also about the way you talk that about time, like you're saying that time does exist, even though a lot of people say it doesn't. Right,
and my thing is, and this is. Just so you know what my work is about or what my background is, I've always been a person who believes in eyewitness reports. I'm believing in using them as research. So if you have eyewitnesses tell you about a particular event, you have enough of them, and they say the same event occurs, then you sort of think of that as a data set, something that you can examine for future reference. Now, writing about people talking about the afterlife or writing about people under deep hypnosis, suddenly I'm because being a background as a filmmaker, suddenly I was in this world of, people channeling and doing all that stuff. And there's a gamut. There's the pyramid hat, gamut, which for whatever reason, people are into that stuff. And then there's, the opposite end of the spectrum. I like to call myself a skeptic because the actual meaning of the word is somebody who thinks outside the common school of thought. Is a skeptic, somebody who doesn't believe in the prevailing school of thought.
Right.
So I like to think of myself that way. So when I started hearing from people, channelers, let's say, or people who talked about channeling, they have a tendency to speak in these kind of, I don't know how to describe it other than, and the word of God is. They do it in a preacher kind of manner. So they'll say, time does not exist.
Yeah.
And what I found in my research is, okay, time doesn't exist for you, but it may exist for other people. And my point being, not to knock anybody in this field, but it's to say everything is kind of relative in terms of this research. And so the relative point is if you're talking to somebody who's channeling somebody in the afterlife, let's just call it that you're channeling, or they have a transistor radio that is, connecting to someone in the afterlife. If you think about that construct for a second, those people over there are not omniscient. They're just people who were here before. And so they have, based on their perhaps many lifetimes, a huge body of knowledge, but it's not all encompassing and it's not omniscient. So, and that's a long way of me saying, in my research, people say time is different over there. It's just relatively different than it is here. For someone stepping off the planet and stepping off of life, let's say, right, and moving through the threshold or the door or whatever you want to call it, after the tunnel, you get to the other side, what they say is that over there, time is relatively different. You might feel like it's non-existent because of the way it moves. But what I point to is when people are over there, and when I say over there, it means they've had a near-death experience, perhaps an out-of-body experience, perhaps they're talking to a medium, or perhaps the medium themselves is talking, or under deep hypnosis, which, my work is basically, I've been filming people for 10 years, having these sessions where they're under deep hypnosis for up to 6 hours and claiming that they're accessing, people on the other side. What they say consistently is that time is relatively different. You have old souls over there, and you have young souls over there. And by the way, they're all equal. Nobody sees each other as higher or lower, gooder or badder, just all different forms of that kind of energy.
Well,
so, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so, what's the criteria? Like, so how do you, when you say old souls and new souls, what is the difference there other than time?
Well, experience, wisdom. So let's pretend that you and I, Al, we take a trip. That's why I call Flipside a tourist guide on how to navigate the afterlife, because in this case, I'm the guide. I'm the tourist.
Yeah.
Who's going over to the flip side. So let's say you and I get in our vehicle and we decide to go over to the flip side. And in our vehicle, and it could be anything, it could be something, it could be a medium helping us get there, it could be a hypnosis, it could be that we have a near-death experience at the same time. That would be unusual. But we are over there and we meet guides. People use the term guides because there's not really a term in English or, in human language to really express what we're meeting, but they consistently call these people guides or mentors or teachers or divine masters or whatever those words are. They're all just words. But it's somebody who represents an older, wiser, a deeper, more profound wisdom. And again, they're not omniscient because they'll tell you up front when you ask them questions. It's what I'm doing in my work. I'm asking them direct questions. They'll say, I don't know the answer to that. It's above my pay grade. If you ask them about what happened, in such and such universe, 500 billion years ago, they'll tell you, I don't know. I don't have access to that information. I'll tell you what I do know, et cetera, et cetera. So you see these older, wiser souls. And then let's say that you and I stop by a soul group, which it's a term that Michael Newton coined, but it basically is anywhere from 3 to 25 people is what he found in his research, and the average was about 15. But each one of us has a group that we normally incarnate with. And if you want to think of like a metaphor that I use, it's usually like a classroom. So think of a class that you've been in, with other students. You're all starting at a certain level. And, maybe it's an 8-year class. Maybe it's a medicine class. And you start at a certain level and you keep going up. And every year, in Earth years, every experience you have, every time you go out in the field and you do some doctoring on people, you gain more experience, and then you graduate to the next level of that class, and then eventually, you see, so you're going further. So those younger souls, people who haven't had much experience, now, how do you differentiate? How would you see them? And in Michael Newton's case, he's the one who sort of laid this out in, I think it was his second book, Destiny of Souls. But my point is, I'm interviewing people who have had the same experiences, and so I'm corroborating what he's done, really. But in his second book, he started asking people, if I held a mirror up to you, what would you look like? And the answer, because he'd never asked the question before, the answer is very unusual. People would say, well, I'm kind of like the color white. Or they say, I'm kind of like the color yellow. I see a lot of yellow in me. Or et cetera, different colors, all the way through the spectrum. And what Newton realized when he was asking these questions, that people were consistently saying that based on how you looked over there, that the spectrum that you were radiating at, generating at, it went from younger souls in the lighter categories to older souls in the darker categories. So the color purple was as far as Newton got in his research. In other words, he never interviewed somebody who was he rarely interviewed people that were in that darker color spectrum. Most of the people he interviewed were in like light blue or sometimes orange, green, et cetera, et cetera. And what he discovered was that these colors, like the visible spectrum, it goes from, one side to the next, right? One is a deeper, richer blending of colors, and one is a lighter color. It just makes sense on a basic paint scale. But ultimately, I found the same thing when I interviewed people about their experience, or while I'm filming someone in their deep hypnosis, the hypnotherapist says, so, if I saw you in a mirror, what color would you be? In my own case, I've done 5 between life sessions now, and I've, been asked that question. So I'm talking to somebody, and the therapist says, so what color is this person radiating? And as I'm looking at them in my mind's eye, I'm seeing this individual like I would have seen them in my life. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
And when the question was asked, so what color is this person radiating? In front of my eyes, they dissolved into a shimmering field of light, as if the dial had been turned slightly on a radio. So that instead of a clear signal, it went to like a fuzzy signal. And in this particular instance, I saw the color orange. I saw some yellow streaks in there, but like a shimmering, very bright light. And then when the person when I finished describing this person, I said, well, it looks like he's got some orange and yellow. I said, I think this is related to his endeavors as an architect in his lifetime. As I finished the sentence, that person reanimated to the visual I'd had a few minutes earlier. So I don't know whether that was my mind making the adjustment. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whether it was my mind turning the dial slightly, or whether it was this other person, adjusting for me so I could see. So, and anyway, that goes a little bit along the lines of people appear as you remember them, for the most part. So, for example, if Aunt Betty passes away at 102, she may come to visit you looking like she's, 52 or 56. You recognize her, but she looks a lot happier and healthier than she ever did. But what I've discovered, and I didn't discover it, but what I've seen in the research is that people over there can appear over here as they would prefer to appear. You see, like with hair and thin, et cetera, et cetera.
Looking good.
I mean, I don't know if I mentioned. I think I mentioned this before, but I had this New York police detective corner me on the movie Salt when I was working on the movie Salt with Angelina Jolie. I was working for the director, and he heard me talking about this stuff, and he cornered me one day and said, I need to talk to you. He locked the door, and he said, I think there's a ghost. I think my house is possessed, is the first thing he said. I said, why? He said, well, there's a ghost haunting my house. I said, well, "Do you know the ghost?" And he said, "Well, that's the funny thing. I asked it was his 8-year-old daughter, saw this person in the kitchen every day." And he said, and that he took out he asked who it was, and he said, the girl said, "Well, he's dressed like you, Dad. He's dressed like a cop." And so then he thought about it, like, who does he know who was dead? It was a cop. And he went, "Oh, my partner." So he found a picture of his partner, but his partner had died 10 years earlier. You see, 2 years before she was born. So she had never seen him, in life. And then he showed her the picture, and he said, "Is this the guy?" And she said, "Yeah, that's him, except he's thinner and has more hair." So, he had a picture of him when he died at age, 50 or 60, let's say. But she was seeing him at, 40. You see? So, obviously, he's generating his image, on the other side as he wants to appear. But anyway, to get back to your original question about time, it's just that, and I've been wrestling with this myself, because what I'm understanding and getting is that, if this is the most simplest way I can put it, because I interviewed somebody during a 6-hour interview, and they said they remembered a lifetime where they were a captain of an English ship, which I found. I found this person's name and history and story. But back in 1610, they were captain of a ship, and they had died at the age of 25. And so now, as she was remembering going into the Between Lives realm, which everybody calls home, as she remembered going home to the Between Lives realm, she sort of reconnected with herself back there, where she's a teacher teaching a class. And the class was mid-class. And she said, "Gosh, it feels like I went out for a cigarette while I had this lifetime." And then later on, I asked her about it. So what did you mean by that? She said, "Well, it was like the 25 years on Earth was like 10 minutes. Like, I don't know, it's like she said to the class, like, 'Hey, we're going to take a break. I'm going to live a life, on Earth as a captain." Yeah. And then she came back. So I started thinking about that. Okay, if that's the case, if it's true, let's just say, okay?
Yeah.
If 25 years over there, 25 years here equals 10 minutes over there, well, think about that. So 100 years is like 40 minutes. So 250 years is like a 2-hour movie, like 120 minutes. You see?
Right.
So 250 years here doesn't seem like that long of a thing over there. And so when you start talking about seeing people, who inhabited the Earth 2,000 years ago, let's say, that's not such an odd construct. You're talking about people who were here 20 movies ago. You see? And so so I'm trying to get my mind around it. The best metaphor I can think of is standing outside a fish tank, where you're looking at a fish like moving at an incredible rate of speed. And, what's their reality looking at us outside the tank? I mean, it's completely, I guess, are we looking like we're in slow motion or something? I would think so.
Yeah.
We barely move, you see? So, it's a mathematical thing, to think about, as well as a perspective thing. And maybe that's why people haven't had that much connection without being burnt at the stake anyway, throughout the history, is because it's so difficult to, be in a car driving 10,000 miles an hour and look out the window and observe what's happening back home, with your relatives giving you a thumbs up.
Right.
That makes sense.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And how do you get information? And how do you know what's, let's say, how do you know what's real, and how do you know what's not? So when you're seeing a psychic, or when you're talking to someone in a deep, trance, something. How do you draw the line? How do you differentiate between when they are just maybe having a fantasy or having a reality?
Or imagination, or creating it in their mind.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I start with the premise with it's all untrue. It all is false. And then, if I find corroboration, then I have to allow that it might be true. So we go from false to might be true. And then if I find further corroboration, then I go, well, wait a second. This is what people say consistently, so we have to allow that that's a possibility. I'll give you one example. Was actually one of the very first cases I came across was a good friend of mine in London, Robert Beer. He's an Oxford professor. And he did, a tragedy happened to him, and he was going to have a session where he was going to try to contact his daughter, who had passed away suddenly. And he did the traditional route. He went around to mediums, mediums that are in England. They have a different tradition over there. The mediums don't get paid. They just do it, so they get, benefit money. It's a donation. It's not like a thing like we do over here. It's like hotlines. And in this case, he went around, because he's an Oxford guy, he was able to go around some well-respected people, but none of them could connect him to his daughter. And he was about to give up on the topic. I had read Carol Bowman's book, Children's Past Lives. This is early on in my research, and I sent it to him because I thought, maybe that's helpful, because, people remembering previous lifetimes. Anyway, and so he wrote me back and said, are you familiar with Michael Newton's work? He was. And so that's what started my journey, really, because I contacted Newton and found out he's retired, and then I started making this documentary about his work. And ultimately, I interviewed him and got his last interview, and then I started filming people under hypnosis, et cetera, and I did a session myself. So now, excited, I wrote my friend and said, hey, you should try this because you might be able to connect with your daughter. So he wrote me this really profound letter about a month later. He did find a therapist in London, and in that session, he spent an hour with his daughter, talking to her, holding her hand, looking her in the eye, her telling him new information, stuff that he didn't know, but as well as showing him the many lifetimes they had, and that this was, this was part of her journey, was this particular exit point, for lack of a better word. But in the session, he said, the way these sessions work, you go to a previous lifetime, and in this previous lifetime, he saw himself in Boston, city he'd never been to, in the 1840s, married to a girl that he knows from this lifetime. Okay, he knew her like in the 1960s. They'd been together a little briefly amount of time, but they were apart. But in his past life review, he sees this woman as his wife. So after the session is done, he writes me this letter, and I wrote him back and said, well, are you still friends with the woman in Boston? He said, I am, actually. I said, well, can we do an experiment? Let me choose the hypnotherapist. Do not tell her anything about your session. And if she's up for it, I'll arrange for that session in New York City, which is what I did. And she had the identical past life memory of being married to this guy in the 1840s in Boston. So those kinds of things are not, the mathematical idea of coincidence is just not a possibility. So in those cases, it also knocks out the scientific argument that these past life memories are people just tapping into the Jungian unconscious, that you're just somehow accessing a memory bank that's floating out there in deep space or something. I mean, that's the argument they have when they talk about this stuff. But look, it's just not in the research. The research is consistent, I'm sorry, and it's replicable, I'm sorry, which is two things that science asks, Can you replicate these events? And the answer is, yes, I can. And now you ask me, see how I make these weird detours? But you did ask me, what am I doing? What's my process? What happened was I started to realize, in my own case, my father had come and contacted me after he passed away, woke me up, I felt his hand on my shoulder, and he said, it's beautiful here, and I'm with my mom and dad, and he named all these people that I know that had passed away. But he named about 6 people I didn't know. He said, I'm here with so-and-so and so-and-so. And the next day, I said to my mom, I think I had a dream where my dad, where Dad contacted me. I said, but who are these names? And she said, oh, those are friends of his who died in World War II. People I'd never heard of, people I'd never met, people I didn't know. And I realized that's new information. So the knock that science has on past life memories is the word cryptomnesia. They believe that you heard it in a book. I'm sorry, you heard it on TV, you saw it in a movie, you heard it in a book.
Well, nowadays you hear it in books. Yeah.
Audible.com, you heard it in a book.
Yeah.
But whatever, somehow it's in your consciousness, or the next door neighbor was playing a TV show and it filtered it. Anyway, whatever. But that's proof that it can't be the case, because if it's new information that you could not have heard, then it couldn't be cryptomnesia. Simple. So I started to focus on that, which is new information from the flip side, from people who are no longer here. And what I realized was, when I was talking to people, I found this other odd thing, which is when I was talking to friends of mine just about the research over coffee, they would ask me inevitably, so how does it work? What do you do? What's the story? Could you put me under hypnosis? And I'd say, no, I'm not a hypnotist. Go see a Michael Newton trained hypnotherapist to get the full idea. But I'd say, look, I'll ask you some questions. Let's see where we can go. And I would start usually with something like a dream, a recurring dream or something like that. Can you, let's access your recurring dream. And of course, any sane person would say, well, I can't. It's a dream. How do I access a dream? I'd say, well, let's just try. Because, look, everything that happens in your lifetime is recorded. There's no delete key in your brain, right? Even while you're sleeping. Yeah. Plane flies overhead. They've shown that if you use, a certain probe in a person's brain at a certain engram, they'll remember exactly that, the emotion, the sound, everything of a particular event that happened whenever. So those things are all there. They're not accessible to us because they're filtered, right? They're off to the side because it's useless information, but it's there. So what my point is this, okay, it's not useless information. It is there. Let's examine it. And the way we can do it is by saying, so what did this person look like in your dream? Usually they'll have that, was it a male or female? And then I asked a series of questions, the same questions that people, hypnotherapists ask, which is, well, where are we? Is it day or is it night? Are you a man? Are you there? Can you look around and see yourself? And by asking these questions in this casual way, I've done it about a dozen times now, I found, maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I found that just under the surface of our conscious mind are these memories that have profound influence on our lifetime, whatever they are. And you can access them if you allow yourself to. It's not like you don't need the ticking clock in front of your face. You really just need to be open to the answer and not judge the answer. That's key. I say, look, just say the first thing that comes to your mind and don't judge it. So, and then I'll say, well, so what year is it? And then a number will come out. People will say, it's the year 20. Anyway, so, that's not a scientific exploration by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a way of me seeing that we can access the flip side or hack the flip side in a conscious way without having to be under hypnosis. And so, I think the best way to do something like that is meditation, obviously. That's just a great mind tool. There's also hypnotherapy, which I recommend finding a Newton-trained hypnotherapist because they're so used to going to the Between Lives realm. It's just a logical thing to take a tour guide who's been to the place you want to go to, you see. Right. Not to knock anybody else's technique or anything else, but most past life regressionists end with, and then what happened, at the end of your life. And then they'll tell you, well, I died, whatever. And so the Newton therapist starts there, basically. They go, you died, and then what happened? And usually people have a blank look on their face. But if you ask, you say, go forward in time. What's the next event that comes to mind, whatever it is? And inevitably, I found people start talking like they're having a near-death experience. They'll say, well, I'm floating, upwards, or I'm walking upwards, or I'm walking up a mountain or something, and I'm seeing like a light. or I'm feeling a light. That's very common. I'm feeling this incredible energy light, and then I'll ask, so what is that? What's the feeling? And almost always people will say, it's a warmth, it's a bliss, it's nirvana, it's like nirvana, or they often say, it feels like unconditional love. And I think that's just such an odd thing for people to say, because it's unconditional love. You know, we can conceptualize what it is, because we know what conditional love is, right?
Right.
I love you if you build my wall for me.
Yeah.
I love you if you vote for me. That's conditional love.
Right.
But unconditional love, we experience it, certainly, hopefully, with parents, right? Or with children.
With dogs.
We experience it sometimes with a lover, with somebody we connect to. Until they don't like us anymore, or whatever.
Love you long time.
But whatever, we do have those moments of clarity of unconditional love. Rarely, but we do have them. But here in near-death experiences, the majority, and I don't know, Bruce Grayson has a chart about how many times people in near-death experience report that feeling of bliss or unconditional love. But my point is, once you sort of examine unconditional love with somebody while you're talking to them, you can say, well, stand in that unconditional love moment for a second. Tell me what that is. And they'll say, well, God, it's a feeling. Okay, well, try to describe it as best you can. Imagine I'm a blind person. Just tell me, what is that? Well, they'll say, I feel connected to everyone and all things. I feel like I'm connected to the universe, or, sense of oneness. Then I've also been talking to people about who have that experience while they're fully conscious. But it's an experience, it's extrovertive, mystical experience is the psychological term for it. But it's when somebody suddenly feels connected to the whole planet. It's a common enough experience that they actually, put it in psychological books. But I've interviewed people. Mario Beauregard, for example, he's a scientist at the University of Montreal, now University of Arizona. And Mario is a neuroscientist who has been using fMRI while people are in various states of ecstasy, like a prayer state, or like he did a whole study with Carmelite nuns, showing that while they're having some kind of ecstatic vision, that it isn't in any particular part of the brain. It's not. There is no God spot. It could be anywhere. And just recently, he started filming doing that with cases of people who were under deep hypnosis. And while they were talking to some higher spirit guide or having those feelings of unconditional love, he told me, there isn't any particular spot in the brain where that comes from. So it's not part of someone's memory. It's likely not even part of someone's brain. It's coming from somewhere else, from some other repository, some other hard drive that retains all of our previous information. And this is also why, hacking the afterlife it's a funny term, I know, but it's also understanding the mechanism or the architecture of the afterlife, in the sense that, hey, wait a second, I want to experience unconditional love. How can I do that? How can I make my life better by, what's the best method to get to that state? Do I have to have a near-death experiences? No, you don't. Fortunately. Do I have to do hypnotherapy? Well, that's one way to do it, and I've filmed 35 so far, and it is consistently reported as such. So that's one way. But there are other ways. Do I need to become a monk? Not necessarily, but you do need to open up your mind to the possibility that you chose your lifetime, that you chose your parents, that you chose to be here for a specific reason, that usually those reasons have to do with empathy, they have to do with compassion, they have to do with helping others. And then all you got to really do is look around and say, so who am I here to help? I mean, it could be you. It could be somebody else. And then, you can actually, so it's a way of allowing yourself to understand, that whole Joseph Campbell idea of follow your bliss. Well, like most people, you're like, okay, where's my bliss? I'd like to follow it. But I can just find it. Is it a grocery store? I can't just find my bliss. This is a way of examining what that is. Why am I on the planet? What did I come here to accomplish? What am I here to do? What's the role I'm here to play?
Have you had personal experience with psychics? Like, have you been using them yourself to connect?
Well, I hadn't up until last year, and mainly because I've always, like anybody else, the skeptical me would say, well, mediums are doing two things. One is they're predicting the future, and since time is not set, okay, that's what the research shows, you can't predict the future. You can predict likely outcomes of the future, but so can flipping a coin. So I would, argue, and I mean, Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona, he wrote the foreword to my first book, Flipside. He's been doing a lot of work in this area, and he's met quite a few, and he's worked with the top mediums and psychics that are out there. And he can, show scientifically that they can be completely accurate about a number of things. But my point is, that's not why people find psychics. They want to know, should I move? Can I win the lottery, etc.? Or who's my soulmate going to be? And, I find that's another complex thing. It's not so simple as, oh, he's Pete. It's much more complex about why you chose your life and why you chose not to be with your soulmate at this point in time, and that eventually, if you're patient, you'll get there because, all the arrows will point you in the right direction, you see? So that's a long way of saying, no, I haven't really focused on mediums until one called me. And this Jennifer Schaefer in Manhattan Beach, California, jenniferschaefer.com, she called me out of the blue and said, I'm a big fan of your books. I've been listening to them. She hadn't read them, just listening. And she said, I just want to talk to you about your research. And I was reluctant because I asked her, I said, well, so what kind of work do you do? She said, well, I help law enforcement agencies and parents with missing person cases. Really? Okay. Well, so tell me a couple of cases you worked on. So she told me about them, and she really, really helped people out. I know that Bill Bratton, who used to be the head of the LAPD, now the NYPD, had flown her to New York to talk to her about her case, one of the cases she worked on. And she does this work pro bono. So, and I've met some of the FBI people who work with her. Okay, so her bona fides are right up there. And so then I said, missing persons. Oh, that's interesting. Well, how would you like to work on the most famous missing person case in history? And she said, I'd love to. So I've been working on the Amelia Earhart story for 30 years. I've worked on the two movies that have been made, the Diane Keaton movie, and I worked on the Hilary Swank movie. But, I've been trying to make my own movie and, my own documentary and a lot of work. Let's just put it that way. And every year or so I give it up. I just go, okay, well, it's not in my card. And then for some reason, it's like Amelia pulls me right back in. So in this case, I thought, well, this was fun. I mean, because I know more than anybody I've ever spoken to or talked to, and I've talked to pretty much everybody, about what happened to Earhart than almost anybody. I mean, that sounds egotistical, but, after 30 years, if you don't know what's going on, you really don't know. So I spent 3 hours interviewing Amelia. But here's the construct, and this is what makes it a little bit different. And so I walk into her office, and she says, oh, your friend so-and-so is here, a friend of mine who just passed away, who she didn't know. Here's Howard Schultz is here. Howard Schultz is the guy who created lighthearted entertainment, naked dating, stuff like that. He died suddenly. He's an old friend. Howard's here. Oh, and I say, oh, that's great. Tell him I said hi. But I'm not here to talk to Howard. See, most people who see a medium, they let the medium do the talking, right? Because, the medium will tell you, your father or your mother, somebody wants to tell you something, and et cetera, et cetera. And my attitude is, that's great. I love them. They know I love them, right? And I know they're there. But I'm more interested in interviewing you about what you can take me to who you can take me to, just to see if it was possible. Because here's the idea. If what the research is showing is true, that people don't die, they don't dissipate into the ether, they go back home, and they plan with their soul group to have their next lifetime. This is consistent reporting, okay?
Yeah.
If that's the case, and even if they're incarnated, not all of them shows up in the incarnation. Again, just consistent with the reporting. Only about 20 to 40% of our life energy or soul energy, whatever you want to call it, shows up here on the planet in a particular person. Why? They say because it would blow the circuits. The energy is so powerful, so strong, we as humans couldn't handle it. People who show up here who are religious icons, avatars, etc., appear to come here with more energy than they normally would have. And so people show up here with more, avatars show up with more energy. Okay, fine, that makes sense. But, so let's pretend somebody, Einstein, first name that comes to mind, no, let's go further back. Because, he only died, whatever, in the 60s, I think. Let's go back to, you pick one, Al. Give me a name of somebody famous.
Who's dead?
History.
Who? Who's dead? Let's see.
Go back.
Go back.
Anybody.
Okay, how about Hitler?
Oh, Adolf Hitler. Too soon. He's still going through his life review.
Oh, he's still going. How about Joan of Arc?
Okay, Joan of Arc. Okay, Jeanne d'Arc. Very good. Okay, so Joan of Arc has her lifetime here. She hears from somebody on the flip side who's talking to her directly. All right. Of course, they put her to the torch for that. She accurately predicts what she's going to be doing on the planet. Hey, I'm here to lead the army. Okay, all right, great. And if you read her diaries, which are fascinating and just really cool, she got killed for being able to talk to the dead, right? Or somebody. She claimed it was Jesus or whatever. Fine. So, how does that? So Joan goes back, and maybe she has some period of time that she's relaxing with her soul group, because she certainly had a difficult time of it here. Well, whatever. Let's say 200 years, something. What year was she? She 1400, 1300,
yeah,
somewhere in there.
Yeah, 14. Yeah.
So let's say in the 1500s, she's with her friends, and they say, "Look, why don't you come back as an American Native American, a Sioux or something like that, and this will be fun. We'll have this really great adventure." And she does. She comes back as a man or a woman. It's her choice, and she has that lifetime. You see, now she goes back, etc. And so now, let's say maybe she's had, I don't know what the average is. I've heard people say 200 years. It doesn't matter. Some people come right back. It depends on, their journey and who they are. There's no set rule in this. But let's just say since, 1300 in the 700 years, she's had 4 incarnations. Okay, you with me?
Yep.
4 different incarnations. 2/3 of her energy is always back home, but 1/3 of her energy showed up here and played a role. Different role, like being on stage. And now you and I are sitting here having a conversation, and perhaps there's a medium in the room, or perhaps you're under deep hypnosis. And I say, "Can we talk to your guide?" And you say, "Sure." I mean, you can always say no, okay? Same with the medium. You're with the medium and you say, "Can we talk to someone who has access to Joan of Arc?" They're going to say yes or no. They, or maybe, or come back later, or I've seen this. They say, "I don't, but you could talk to my guide." And then I'm talking directly to their guide, again, not somebody omniscient, but somebody who's been on the planet, and you say, "Do you have access to Joan? Joan, can we talk to Joan?" And they might say, "I know somebody who does." All right, you with me? It's like a game of telephone, a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask, can you bring that person forward? Can they come forward? And again, you're outside of time, so it's not so hard to pull people in. It's just an energetic, it's almost like Google. You're asking for the energy. You got to search out, find it, pull it forward, okay? I know it sounds weird, but whatever. Just go with my imaginary situation here.
Okay.
And then I say, "So Joan, can I talk to you directly?" She can say no, she can say yes. If she says yes, I can now ask a series of questions. And the questions, if they're consistent, you can ask, so why did you choose that lifetime? What did you think that you accomplished what you wanted to do here on the planet? Since you're so famous and since people are saying your name throughout history, do you feel like that was not an accomplishment or an advantage? And why did you choose Joan, and why did you choose the washerwoman in Boston in the 1800s? What do they have in common? You see, and now you're getting answers. And, again, of course, as a skeptic, you're thinking, oh, this is crazy. The whole construct of this idea is insane. But this is where it gets interesting. If you ask for new information, you say, look, is there anything you can tell me about X that is not common knowledge, nobody knows it here? Like, where's your sword buried? Okay? I don't think Joan had a sword that was buried, but, and so that's hacking the afterlife. I did that with Amelia Earhart because I got to a point, and like I say, I know more about her than pretty much anybody. I was able to ask her, so what happened to your body? And she told me new information. Stuff that's not out there, and believe me, I know what's out there. She told me new information. And when she told this new information to me, even I didn't accept it and said, oh, come on. That doesn't make any sense. And she insisted, the medium's talking, but the medium's saying, no, she's insisting that, you're inaccurate, she's correct. That she died of dysentery, that U.S. soldiers dug up her body, but they only recovered her arm. And that was not any part of any knowledge, even though I've been doing this research for 30 years, that was accessible to me, and I doubted it. But 10 minutes after I finished the conversation, I got a call from a friend of mine, former NTSB investigator, who said, Rich, I've just been going through all this incredible research, and everything that you've been saying about her being, landing in Amelia Earhart, being arrested by the Japanese, and being thrown into prison and dying in prison, and the U.S. Marines finding her plane and burning her plane, all of that stuff is in this research that I'm looking at. He said, but when they dug up her body, they only found her arm. And that was not something I had ever heard, but here was a guy calling me to confirm that. And then since then, I went and found a corroboration of that detail from a Chicago Tribune article in 1977. So you see, she gave me new information from the flip side. Even though Amelia Earhart is not reincarnated, she's still back there. And as she said, stop looking for me because I'm here. Stop trying to dig me up. I'm here. Okay, leave me alone. Anyway.
Well, yeah. So I was going to say that. How is it that you confirm new information if it's something that's not out there?
Well, that's an example. So,
yeah,
and oddly enough, listen, if you search Amelia Earhart's arm or any of that stuff, you won't find it. And in my case, I was transcribing the interview with her, right, with the medium for the book Hacking the Afterlife. And at some point, the medium said, Amelia said to the medium, well, there's somebody who has my dental records. And I've heard from experts that there is no such thing. So, I thought, oh, well, maybe she's got that wrong. Maybe people don't have her. So I Googled the search term,
right.
There are dental records. And up came this article, which was the UPI, and it was, like I say, whatever. Up came the article where they talked about these soldiers who, in the interview that they did with an independent researcher back in the 70s, they confirmed that they had dug up her body, but they had only recovered her arm and a partial rib cage. Anyway, so that's how you verify it. So you get some information from the flip side that you didn't know about, right? And now you go and ask people, is this... So listen, I want to be clear. I'm not about trying to prove Amelia Earhart, this is what happened to her. That's not my focus, even though I've been working on it for 30 years. My focus is this. You can access the afterlife. You can ask them questions that you don't know the answer to. You have to stay open to the answer, and then you're going to corroborate it. So let's just say the question is this: how do we save our planet? How do we get energy from renewable sources in a cheaper way than we're doing now? How do we get solar panels for nothing? Or how do we change salt water to fresh water for pennies? How do we do that? And so let's say that you and I or anyone is in a session with somebody and they ask that question. You add that question to the list of questions they're asking about their own life, their own journey. How do we do that? And the spirit guides will tell you. They'll say, well, I don't know, but I know somebody who does know. You want to talk to them? And you ask them. And now let's say that you got to think of all the filters that this information comes through. It's going through a spirit guide who is now telling the person lying on a couch, who is now using the best of their language to say, well, here's the formula, right?
Right.
And so, that is the funny thing about it. And maybe the formula is not accurate. So whatever, you do it with 10 people. And at the end, you may not have the formula, but you may open your mind up to see the answer. If a scientist starts thinking about things outside the box in a different fashion, then they have an opportunity to, find a new method. Maybe it's in their subconscious. Maybe they always knew how to change salt water to fresh water for pennies. And maybe just this conversation we're having now startles them into remembering it. You see?
Right.
So it doesn't really matter if it's accurate or true, if the result is what you're looking for.
Wow.
Anyway, I've also found that, the more I do research on this topic and the more I talk about it with people, the more I hear from people who say, I listened to one of your book talks on YouTube and it opened my mind up, and now I'm hearing information from people that seem to be my guides, and they're telling me stuff that I'm supposed to be doing. You see?
Right.
That wasn't me. That's not me doing that. That's their guides talking to them about, helping the planet Earth. And that's why I'm doing this. I don't make any money doing it. And I warn people not to buy the book. I said, please do not. There's a lot of stuff in this new book, Hacking the Afterlife, that's going to disturb people. I don't mean on a, like the world's coming to an end way, but disturb people because there's religious topics in there that people on the flip side are talking about that are, that got Joan of Arc part of the stake. Let's just put it that way. And, so I don't really talk about that stuff. But if you feel compelled to examine this stuff, then yeah, sure, check it out. Check it out. And it's a money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, get your money back, get your pennies back.
Well, it's always interesting to talk to you. Always. So now your new book is out, Hacking the Afterlife? And
yes, it is. And I, did one of these weird things where I had a chance to hold off and do some more editing, and which I'm still doing. But that's the great thing about, this new form of publishing. You can submit new files and you can fix any typos or stuff like that. But because I was speaking at the IONS conference in Orlando, I just decided to put it out there. And so it's available on Amazon and Kindle exclusively, but you can get the print copy through Amazon. And it's 575 pages. I got to warn people, it's a long book. It's a Wonderful Afterlife is going to be 700 pages, but I broke it up into 2 books because I figured that was just too much to ask anybody to look at. But this one, it's long, and, you can certainly, it'll take a couple of summers to go through.
Oh,
let's put it that way.
It's all good. And you've got Flipside as well. And what's your website? Now, that's richmartini.blogspot.ca?
No, just richmartini.com or hackingtheafterlife.com. That's pretty easy to remember.
Oh, yeah. Perfect.
Those are the best ones. Yeah, and they have links to where you can purchase it or pick it up. There's Flipside the film, which I think is $1.99 on Amazon, And I recommend watching that because it gives you a sense of what I'm talking about, people under deep hypnosis, what they're saying, et cetera, et cetera. And it sort of lays the groundwork for the transcripts. This is what Flipside is. And then It's a Wonderful Afterlife is more with scientists talking about consciousness as well as near-death experiences. And then Hacking is trying to make direct contact through all these modalities to see if people can get new information from those who are no longer on the planet.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much again for talking to us.
Thank you, Al. Great. Great talking to you anytime, bro.
The mission has been completed.
The end. By George, he's got it. It is the end. I'll see you.
This has been a production of the Z-Talk Radio Network.
If you're lying to me, I'll be back.